Age of Empires 2 was probably the most influential game in my life. As a child growing up in a multicultural world surrounded by different ways of life and historical narratives that didn't always align, I had a natural curiosity to the history behind these cultures and how they became what they are today. Age of Empires 2 took me on a wild ride, from the steppes of Mongolia riding alongside Genghis Khan to the deserts of the Levant, defending Jerusalem with Saladin, to the passionate, prosecuted France of Joan of Arc. It inspired me to dig deeper into history and the characters and cultures they represented, and I became a bit of a history nerd, which I proudly remain to this day. I started digging deeper into the histories behind those characters, the real reasons they fought, and as I kept learning, one question kept gnawing at me. Why is military power in games always measured by things like hit points, attack stats, and armor ratings, when in real life, weapons and armor often didn't matter much at all in conflict? Where's morale? Where's conviction? Where's faith? These concepts often receive little to no gamification at all, despite how central they are to the struggles of mankind throughout time. Let's take a look at this guy. This is a camel rider from Age of Empires 2. These are his stats. Now you might not be familiar with these numbers if you're not a pro gamer like myself, but even if you are, I want you to really think about this. Why these numbers? HP, short for hit points or health, is supposed to represent a soldier's, well, health. Get hit enough times and you die. Simple. Except it's not. Because while a camel rider in AoE 2 can take a dozen sword swings before going down, in real life, camels are surprisingly easy to annoy. On a more serious note, mapping damage more realistically to different body parts, known as localized damage, is already implemented in other genres such as FPS games. And it would probably be extremely micro-intensive to aim skill shots at certain body parts with an army of units in an RTS, similar to how you do when controlling a single character in a MOBA. So we have valid reasons to this simplification, and the same can be said for attack and armor. But we start to see a real disparity when you compare how these mechanics are implemented compared to the implementation of the only morality-based mechanic in Age of Empires 2. Conversion. You see, certain religious units, namely monks, can convert an enemy unit to your side of the battlefield. This depends on how much faith they have stored. But the thing is, there is no faith meter or indicator of sorts to tell me how many wololos it takes for my unit to convert another. This actually matters because some units are resistant to conversion, like my trusty camel rider, who will take longer than a night to convert. Also, the fact that the monk says wololo just gives you an idea of how much of a joke this mechanic is. While certain civilizations in Age of Empires 2 have viable monk strategies, such as the Aztecs, it is at best a niche, quirky, and funny thing to do in the game. Later installments of AoE emphasize it even less, with Age of Empires 3 initially removing the mechanic altogether, and Age of Empires 4 turning conversion into a much more high-risk, high-reward strat that again is irrelevant in 99% of games. This explicit design choice tells me the developers simply didn't want to develop a serious morality system for their strategy game. Perhaps they saw the concept as too unstrategic for the so-called strategy game. Maybe they thought it was hard to balance. We'll never know. Ultimately, as a player, I can't help but read in that these morality systems are, if I'm being generous, secondary, and at worst, completely irrelevant when it comes to the important deciding factors in these historical battles. Way below how sharp my sword is or how much armor you have. Surely conviction didn't matter that much, right? As I dived into history, one of the characters that I was incredibly interested to to learn about was Khalid ibn al-Waleed, one of the greatest military commanders in history. He led the early Muslims against the Persian and Roman empires, and somehow never lost a single battle in his military career. I was lucky to get my hands on the book about him written by Agha Ibrahim Akram, a Pakistani general and researcher who spent 5 years visiting the physical locations of Khalid's battles that spanned 6 different countries. It was incredible to read the perspective of an army general who understands the importance of military strategy and see just how much he appreciated Khalid's unique genius. If I had to summarize in short what made Khalid so successful, I would summarize it in these 4 points: battlefield adaptation, tactical awareness, the element of surprise, and moral maximalism. Age of Empires does an amazing job at simulating the first 3, but not so much the last one. Now let's go over each element and analyze an example from Khalid's life, how it maps onto Age of Empires mechanics, and how to fill the gaps with the last one. At the Battle of Mu'tah, the Muslim army was vastly outnumbered. Their original commanders fell one after the other. When Khalid took command, he didn't just throw his troops into another frontal assault. He restructured his entire army mid-battle, created new unit formations, and used psychological deception to make the enemy think reinforcements had arrived. The result? A strategic retreat with minimal losses, a move that saved the army and earned Khalid recognition as a master tactician. In Age of Empires, this might look like pulling units back to regroup in the middle of a losing engage, attacking with a much smaller force deep in their base to grab their attention, and retreating temporarily to save what little you have. At the Battle of Yarmouk and facing a massive Byzantine army, Khalid used the terrain to his advantage, dividing the battlefield into controllable sections and moving his cavalry with surgical precision. He even anticipated flanking attempts and preemptively countered them with hidden reserves. His awareness turned what should have been an overwhelming defeat into a historic rout. In Age of Empires terms, this is like understanding your opponent's civilizational strengths and weaknesses, anticipating what kind of units they will make, and making perfect counters to those units ahead of time, leading to having a perfect army composition that can crush them in battle. At the Battle of Shiraz, Khalid led his army across the Euphrates under cover of night to trap a coalition force of Romans, Persians, and Arabs. His timing and surprise attack caused complete disarray among enemy ranks. This would be like pulling off a perfectly timed castle drop in AoE, stealthily guiding your villagers through the fog of war right up to the enemy location, so that the castle is just out of range of sight while being built, but just close enough to start hitting your enemy with your arrow volleys as soon as it's complete. This is really by far Khalid's most important characteristic, and something that can be seen throughout all the early Muslim conquests. Maximizing your own army's morale while completely destroying your enemy's morale. You see, all armies have a reason to fight. Some fight to defend their land, some fight for revenge, others to win over a certain prize, and a complete mixture of these reasons and more complex reasons. Ultimately, when the army's on the battlefield, every soldier will constantly be asking this question: is this cause really worth my life? As long as the answer is yes, they will continue to fight. But as soon as it's a no, they will either turn tail and run, or try to surrender. And it was this element that the early Muslim armies had to their advantage, and that their commanders fully maximized and utilized. Their cause was effectively infinitely worth fighting for. When the outcome of a battle for you is either worldly victory and conquest in this life, which means sweet loot, honor and prestige for your people, or, on the other hand, guaranteed paradise in the next life. It's a win-win deal. In one famous letter Khalid sent to the Persian commander, Khalid said, "You will face men who love their death as much as you love your life." For a more easily simulatable example, during every battle in this time period, it was the custom for armies to send duelists forward to duel one another before battle officially started. and Khalid would be keen to target the enemy commander, knowing that if he fell, the enemy morale would fall with him, making the rest of the battle much easier. To reach his goal, he would go out himself and call for a personal duel with the enemy commander. And if the enemy commander refused and sent out someone less stationed than him, his army would already lose their respect. And so, more times than not, the enemy commander would accept, and then it was Khalid's job to finish him off, which happened every single time. This effectively forced the enemy army to start every battle with a moral debuff, having just lost their main commander. Later battles, the Persians and Romans stopped bringing their commanders forward, but that only harmed morale even further. AoE doesn't simulate anything like this, the closest thing being the already described pitiful conversion mechanic. In Age of Empires, a villager will fight to the death if you tell it to, but real soldiers don't behave like that. Real armies can win or lose based on something as intangible as morale, no matter how high their armor, HP, and attack is. But there is one game that I know of that tried to simulate this system of morale with some degree of success, and I bet you've probably never heard of it. Quraish is a 2005 real-time strategy game produced by Syrian video game company Afkar Media. It is the first Arabic language strategy game based on the early battles of Islam, primarily focusing on the Rashidun Caliphate's successful campaigns against the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanid dynasty of Persia. As you can imagine, Khalid plays a central role in the game's main campaign, but I want to focus on how they implemented the morality system in a simple yet effective way. You see, every unit in Quraish has a little blue bar underneath their health bar called loyalty, which measures how much loyalty your unit has to your commands. Killing enemy units increases your loyalty, while your own units dying reduces it. Being around commander units also replenishes low loyalty, but if a commander dies, you lose a lot. If a unit's loyalty reaches 0 near the enemy soldiers, they will switch sides to the enemy. If they're far away, they will just desert your army. So managing your morality becomes one of the main mechanics of the game, and the real cherry on top is how they designed the civilizations around this mechanic. In Quraysh there are 3 civilizations: Arabs, Romans, and Persians, and the latter two actually have much stronger units and better stats on their units. But Arabs have stronger morality, being easier to raise and harder to go down, allowing their soldiers to easily win the morality battle in every skirmish. It's a very risky but satisfying playstyle, fighting with your general in the front line, but it beautifully mirrors reality. And while this game is focused on a very small time frame, this concept really applies globally and in every time zone, even in many of the campaigns in Age of Empires, ironically enough. In the Third Crusade, for example, Richard is described in the game's main campaign as a romantic warrior who always fights from the front lines, which he was. But as a player, you never really get to see or experience that. It would have been fun to see Richard as a hero unit in the Siege of Acre, fighting alongside his men and trying to snipe him as a defender. But instead, I just got to build a wonder. Yay! This is really the deepest irony I found while researching this video. As much as Age of Empires and other strategy games ignore or minimize concepts like faith and morality when it comes to the mechanics of these games, the actual stories and campaigns are filled to the brim with these ideas, from Joan of Arc to William Wallace to really almost every other campaign. You have tales of these inspiring leaders leading outnumbered and ill-equipped armies against much larger and more advanced adversaries. But then you head into the actual game and well, it's time to mass units and buy upgrades and hoard resources. These games almost feel like a meta-commentary on modern life. Even if everyone knows deep down that there's more to life than amassing wealth, spending it on shiny things, and destroying everyone who gets in your way, the systems we live in encourage us to chase those ends regardless. So much so that we're even designing games that reinforce that idea, even while the same stories and narratives in those games are trying to tell the opposite message. This cognitive dissonance seems to be more indicative of a deeply held ideological belief underlying the designers of these games, one which I of course can't confirm without asking the developers themselves, but one that is all too common in the age we live in. That is, that none of these beliefs are actually real. Rather, they were just tools by these very same leaders to control the masses. And thus, why would you ever want to simulate something you believe is so fake and illusionary when you can simulate real things that actually matter, like gold and armor and sword sharpness, I guess. But that's just a theory, a game theory. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe. If you're interested to learn more about Khalid ibn al-Waleed, I'm writing a historical fiction novel about him, set to be released next year. You can check out the first chapter of my novel in the description down below. Thanks again. May your sword stay sharp and your faith sharp.